renew, and reimagine retirement. Welcome to Retire Repurposed. This podcast is dedicated to help people transition into fulfilling and purposeful retirements. Retirement is a big life change. In fact, the two most dangerous years of a person's life are the year they were born and the year they retire. We believe that retirement is not the end, rather the beginning of what could be the most impactful season of a person's life. So don't retire, become repurposed. Well, I'm your host, Jared Sebesta. I'm the co-founder of Retire Repurposed alongside Ben Tejas. Thank you so much for joining us today. Maybe you're listening to us on the radio. Maybe you found us online. Regardless, head over to iTunes, find our podcast, subscribe, and better yet, leave us a quick positive rating and review. If you just take a moment and do that, we would appreciate that so much. Now, this podcast is all about retirement, but it's not about money. It's about the non-financial parts of retirement, which many times can be even more challenging than the financial. Few people can just flip the switch from working a career 30, 40 plus years and then shutting it off on Retirement Friday without methodical steps to preparing to live out what we call a repurposed retirement. If you want more for your life and your retirement, then you have come to the right place. Well, on this episode, we continue our series on retirement habits. Healthy habits are important at any time in your life, but especially in retirement. Time is one of your greatest assets if you are a retiree. But if you have bad habits, that time is going to work against you. Today, we cover the habit of setting a daily schedule. Setting a daily schedule is the best way to prevent each day looking the same and losing track of time. In this podcast, Ben explains the best time to create your daily schedule, and he gives 5 things each day should include in the life of a retiree. Enjoy this episode. All right, folks, we are continuing this series on retirement habits, and we have a wonderful show on tap for you today. We're going to spend this show and the next show talking about really setting schedules, but we're going to get very specific over the habit of setting a daily schedule today, and this is super important to the life of a retiree. Before we get started, just another reminder, we have a Facebook group called Becoming Repurposed in Retirement. We've got a growing community of people that refuse to accept the typical American dream retirement. If you join this group, you're going to get more tips on living repurposed, special content, Facebook Lives, Q&A sessions. Just go to facebook.com and search Becoming Repurposed in Retirement to join a growing community of people that want retirement to be everything that it was supposed to be. Ben Tejas joins me on the show here now, and we've had now, looks like 4 or 5 episodes of doing this idea of retirement habits. And really, I've really enjoyed this series because this is getting kind of down to the nitty gritty. You know, repurpose is kind of an idea. It's a theory of, having purpose in retirement, but we're kind of getting down to where the rubber meets the road on how you live this out.
Yeah, this is the real stuff, right? This is the stuff where you're putting it into practice and hopefully making direct changes in your lifestyle. That starts with just good habits. And I'm convicted again, in my own life as I go through these. There's some things that, we're sharing that I'm like, I've got to start doing this better myself.
Yeah. In the book by James Clear, Atomic Habits, he talks about how we find our identity off our habits. So our habits have a huge they carry momentum in how we live our life, and we find identity out of those things. So, having bad habits is bad. Having bad habits in retirement is even worse.
Yeah, I love that book, and if you're a reader, go and read that book. Kind of to give some weight to why we're talking so much about habits on these shows. I think he says something, and this is a bad quote because I don't have it in front of me, but something like habits are really the compound interest of self-improvement, or the compound interest of, really it's that idea, I come from a financial world where it's like, I know that little things, that you do early in your life of putting money away and saving, and that compound interest idea, it builds up into something real at the end. Well, the same thing with habits, right? And that came directly from that book. It was like, let's start to look at little incremental changes, these habits that we can put these daily tasks that we're talking about today into your life, which will improve your life as a whole.
Yeah, and where you are today is a reflection of your habits over the last 1 to 5 years. You know what I'm saying? So how we live our day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month life, we are basically a conglomeration. Where we are today, our mentality, our spirituality, our physical health many times is just it's an average of all of those habits put together. So this is a really, really important thing to talk about.
Yeah, and make them positive, right? I mean, we're talking about positive things you can do, but if we can stick to positive attitudes versus just, positive habits, right? It's so much easier to roll downhill. We know that. So it will take work. Each and every one of the things today, positive habits that will make, and the things we've been talking about the last few shows, that will change your life for the better.
We started with having a heart of gratitude. We talked about having positive self-talk. We talked about the habit of reflecting. Last week, we talked about the habit of movement. And we were the first to say, we're not doctors. We're not physical trainers. Certainly, if you were to see us in person, that's not our forte.
What are you saying?
However, there is some truth. And Ben, this comes back to your experience working with retirees. Yeah, your background's not in physical training or being a physician, but you have seen the effects of retirement and how that act greatly affects somebody's physical health.
Yeah, and I think it's, again, the act of retirement has more to do with your aging body than actually does the age as you're getting older. So yeah, it happens to be around that in your mid-60s typically for a lot of people. And what they find is when they stopped working, their mind and their body does age quicker, more to do with their not necessarily their age at that time, but a lot more to do with just the fact that they are now retired.
Yeah, exactly. And when we start talking about movement and exercise, I think everybody's, their mind goes to going to a gym. And, hey, I've been going to a gym regularly for a long time, and I'm pro gym. But we're talking about movement. I mean, just walking uphill, brisk walks, pickleball. I mean, for crying out loud, talk about the latest craze in the world right now of athletic activity. Pickleball, pretty low, strenuous activity. People love it. And then we talked about, taking moving your body and combining it with other aspects of being repurposed. And that's where this really becomes powerful.
Yeah, the most powerful thing you can do is combine that movement with purposeful interaction with people that you love, right? And do things together. And some people are like, I'll just do things with my grandchildren, and that's great. But do some things with people that share your values, that can maybe challenge you, but make sure you're not getting in isolation, but you're adding activity with purposeful, meaningful conversation with others.
Yeah, I mean, we've watched people play pickleball. They're always laughing. They're having a good time, and so that's part of it as well. So when you can combine all those things, that's when it becomes really powerful. If you missed the last couple of shows, again, can't recommend you enough. Go back, subscribe on iTunes, find our podcasts, and check out those shows. A lot of good stuff in the past several shows. So today we're going to talk about the next retirement habit. And again, we're going to talk about specifically setting a schedule, but setting a daily schedule. This is a huge part of a retiree's life that has to get addressed.
Yeah, it does, Jared. One of the things that I hear from new retirees that it might sound nice at first, but actually ends up being, in my mind, like, ooh, I kind of cringe, is, Ben, every day just kind of gets lost with the next, or every day feels like a Saturday, or, hey, I don't even know what day it is anymore. To me, that's a problem.
It's a red flag.
It is. It's a red flag of I'm starting to feel like, oh man, some of their intentionality of how they lived in the past due to the guardrails their job created for them is gone.
Yeah, I think it can almost go the other way too. I've also spoken with retirees where they say, man, I'm just so busy, I'm getting pulled in 1,000 directions. Well, setting a daily schedule can help kind of, I don't want to say weed out, but also become very intentional with your time as well. So it can kind of play on both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, it does. I think what you have to remember is, and we're going to talk about all these things, but you have to, when you make your daily plan, make sure that you're putting in the most important pieces first. So what we're going to cover today are some of the most important things that every day should have for a retiree. So you've probably heard the analogy of like put the big rocks in first, right? So when you make a daily plan, it's like if you picture a cup of an empty cup, right? And you want to fit a bunch of rocks and pebbles into that cup. If you start with just putting a bunch of little tiny pebbles in the bottom, you're going to fill it up, and then you can't get the big, most important things into that jar. Whereas if you start with the larger, more important pieces and you put them in there, those smaller things will still fit in the cracks. So that's really what we're talking about, and why having a daily schedule that is engineered specifically with those important things is part of your repurposed retirement.
We're going to get to that specifically here by the end of the show. Let's talk first, what are some dangers of not setting a schedule? Because I think, again, no disrespect to retirees, they go into retirement with very little plan. They just kind of take the days as they come. But what are some dangers of not really being intentional with our daily schedule?
Well, I think it starts with some of the stuff we talked about in the last few shows with your health, right? You become sedentary. The easiest thing to do is to not move, right? And moving takes some energy. So like you will, by default, tend to not move. So you will slowly become more sedentary in your lifestyle. A schedule gets you moving.
I think that the default position for a lot of people, if they're not careful, is being still. And again, we've mentioned it many times before. That's a slippery slope to get on, especially when you start approaching, again, your mid-60s, 70s, because your natural health is kind of naturally declining. And you combine that with not moving, that can be a real problem. What's another one?
Well, I think we tend to become solitary, right? Not sedentary, but solitary, meaning we're isolated. There's nothing more dangerous for people than becoming isolated. Even if you're kind of somebody who's more of an introvert, you do need some interaction with others because we know God made us. I mean, we're created to be with others. God didn't just create Adam and move on from there. He created Eve. And then from there, we saw communities develop. And I know that was on purpose, right? God saw us by ourselves and didn't like it.
Right.
So he knew we needed, he didn't want a man to be isolated, didn't want a woman to be isolated. So I think that's very, very important.
I think having stuff on your schedule is just kind of what I would say good for the soul. I've always, I've experienced this in my own life. When I don't have anything on my calendar, whether it be a quarterly trip or our next vacation or just anything to do, if I've got a real quiet week of work, I'm not usually as engaged or excited about that week. I think that there's something, I don't know if there's a biblical tie to this, but I feel like it's good for the soul to have something on your schedule to do and get it done. I don't know. Can you relate to that?
Well, yeah, I think specifically you should have something during the day you're looking forward to. You should have something during the week, the month, and the year. I mean, we should set things out there that give us anticipation for something that is proven to be very good for somebody's mental health.
Yeah. So again, happy people tend to always have that schedule made, but also too, it kind of gets the ball rolling and makes things happen, doesn't it? It said if it's not on the calendar, it's not going to happen. I know that for me, that's exactly my life, day to day.
Yeah, same thing with just you make a list, right? Mm-hmm. Same idea. If it's not on there, it's not going to happen. It gets it in front of you and make sure that those things do happen.
So they make them happen. They also, it makes you become very efficient with your time, which again is kind of the opposite to the default setting of retirement where we just kind of get lost day to day. We've talked about Parkinson's Law off air a lot, Ben, and this is kind of an interesting concept that comes up in a lot of self-help books. But Parkinson's Law basically says whatever time you give, you allow a task to take, it's going to take that amount. So if you have a project, that you want to get done at home and it's going to get done this weekend. If you give it 2 days over the weekend to get it done, it will get done. But if there's no boundary to that time, dude, that task, instead of taking a weekend, could take years, and it frustrates your spouse. That's kind of how it works.
Yes,
it does. But again, it's talking about boundaries. It makes you put boundaries on your time. And again, this comes back to the idea of guardrails, which you've mentioned many times before.
Yeah, the idea of guardrails is so important, and remembering that your work created that for you. Your work gave you your own daily schedule, and you just have to engineer things back into your day.
So let's talk about how should a retiree go about setting a daily schedule. There's no right or wrong way to do this, but there's certainly kind of a template that we follow.
Yeah, and certain things that you have to have in every single one of those days. So I think you start out with, it's kind of, I like the thought of starting your day the day before. Right? So if you can start your day the evening before, and we've talked about this on a few shows before about your pre-bedtime routine. Nothing worse, and I can't believe that some people actually fall asleep to the TV, to whatever media station they're on or late night TV host. I do not want more of that person or that information in my brain before going to bed.
Right.
So you should start out not on TV or watching TV, but then make sure that you have a few key components in that daily, or evening routine.
Yeah, and again, one of those was gratitude, and we started this whole series on having a heart of gratitude, how important it is to, start the day with gratitude and end the day with gratitude. So if you're doing this evening routine, that's going to be part of it, and that's where this can slip into. Just one point here to that, I think I heard a study, it was like 93% of adults would all agree ending the day with screens via TV or phone is bad, but like 76% of people still do it. I find that interesting. We all acknowledge that we shouldn't, but but three quarters of us are doing it.
Yeah, I'm one that struggles with that. It's like sometimes your day, your brain's going so fast. I'm like, I just need to wind down with watching something. Mm-hmm. And I've been challenged by that by my spouse. And I think many times, let us challenge everyone today on that. Just make sure you're ending your day with some gratitude, reflection, prayer, right? Let's think about, let's be grateful to God for what has happened that day. Let's reflect on both the good things, the bad things, again, so we learn from those things during the day. Mm-hmm. And I think the last thing is probably make sure you're carving out time and really kind of beginning to think through the next day. Yes. Take an inventory of your day, mm-hmm. and maybe that list that you have things that you've created. Think, okay, these are things I get to do tomorrow. Notice what I said there. It's not, I'm beating myself up because this list didn't get done. It's look at what I get to accomplish tomorrow, right? And that's, I think, your mindset going into the next day.
The last hour before you go to bed has been proven that that's the most important hour of the day, because it kind of engages your mind, your spirit. And so if you're engaging your mind and your spirit and your thoughts on those things, it's not hard to draw the connection as to how much better the next day can go, rather than just waking up and it's another day. I don't even really know what date it is. I mean, I don't think that people I don't think they really believe that, but it's a saying that people say to describe how every day is kind of all the same, and that's what we're trying not to do. So this is some really, really good stuff. So let's talk about, as retirees are planning out that next day, what are some things that need to be addressed, or things that need to be engineered into each day?
Yeah, so these are those big rocks we were talking about earlier that go in first in every single day. So I think it starts out, one of them, with activity and movement. Now, I'm not saying it has to be early in your day, but it does have to be part of your day.
Yeah.
Jared, you would say it should be early in your day.
Well, it may not. You should be. For me, it just works that way. I don't know what it is about me, but I always my mantra is like activity before breakfast. So me personally, I try not to eat at night. So I try to eat supper, 5, 6 o'clock, and then not eat. And then I wake up with an empty stomach, and then I work out. I love working out on an empty stomach, and that makes me look forward to breakfast that much more. I don't know. That's just me. But that has to happen. Even this morning, my wife is like, why? Like, it's winter in Minnesota. It's snowing. And I'm like, I just got to go because this is part of my routine. So regardless, when you do it, activity needs to be in there.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, so I'll talk about how I get activity. It's that zone 2 movement that we've been talking about on the show. So what I love to do is and my wife always tells me, like, you're the only person I know that can come home from a day at the office and then want to go out and work. Mm-hmm. And I do. I think, so the side note here, God, I know when he created people, he didn't envision us sitting in front of a computer all day.
Right.
We work, right? So being able to go out and accomplish some tasks around my farm, maybe cut a couple trees down, maybe just, my kids joke, you just move dirt for the reason of moving dirt, right?
Sometimes, yeah.
Sometimes I do that, but I need it. I need that in my day. So I would say the activity movement for me looks less like I'm trying to get it, but it's just part of my day.
I think activity too, by the way, it's not something that is just for 1 hour per day. Spread the activity throughout. Don't just take one walk and be done. You said sitting in front of a computer screen, we're not engineered for that. We're not engineered to like go to the gym for an hour and then sit for 23 hours either. Like, our bodies were created to move. That was last week's show. But they're created to move throughout the day. So again, is there ways to engineer that activity in throughout the day? It might look like an intentional walk in the morning, but maybe it's pickleball with friends. Maybe it's a walk, or I'm going to do a hobby that's going to give me some activity. So get the activity throughout the day when it is.
And if you're in retirement, I'll end that part, the activity part, with this. Make sure you have a smartwatch smartwatch. Make sure you have a watch or a phone that's tracking your steps, because I know when I end a day and I look down and there's 12,000 steps or 14 or whatever, that was a good day. Whereas I know I have days where literally it's 4,000 steps. I mean, like that, how do you even make that? How can I even get to my office and back home? But the reality is I know it happens and I know how I feel afterwards.
If you don't have a smartwatch, chances are your smartphone is already tracking your steps. I've told my in-laws, I'm like, heads up, your smartphone already is tracking that, and they were just shocked that their phone knew how many steps they were taking. That's how I track my steps, by the way. I just have my phone in my pocket, but I'm always checking that, especially later in the day. I'm kind of like you, Ben. So activity and movement's one thing. What's another one?
Well, I think fun, man. I mean, I think too often times we forget that we should have some enjoyment in our day as a retiree. I mean, sometimes we talk about these shows and it feels like, oh man, they want me to keep working. No, we want you to have a great life, okay? So I definitely believe in, get some hobbies, get some things that keep your mind creative, get some things that keep your body moving. You look at those hobbies specifically as they should be giving you joy. They should be giving me some, time with other people, and that's what makes it important. So again, I think fun needs to be in every single day.
Social time needs to be in there as well. Sometimes your hobbies is just you out in the shop, or you tinkering with whatever your hobby is, but social time needs to be engineered in there as well.
Yeah, I think if you look at just connection with others, so important. So part of every single day, one of those big rocks that goes into the cup first that you can't go without is some degree of social time in every single day.
That could look like your spouse having some connection time there. It could be dinner with friends, but I don't think we're suggesting you have to have a dinner date every single night. You don't have to do that, but connection can look like phone call, text, email, anything that's some intentional time set aside for other people. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and spend time with people that make you better. I think sometimes we're like, oh yeah, I got to go hang out with the guys. Well, if they're not making you better, do not, you don't need to do that. So find people that, if you struggle with laughter, find some. Laughter is so important in your daily routines. If you find somebody that makes you laugh, makes you have fun. I mean, I've got friends in my life right now that I know, man, they just make me laugh. So I think that's very, very important.
Another one is adding value. We have to add value. And I think, again, adding value, that could be taken a number of different ways. We're not anti-hobbies. We're not saying that everything has to be adding value, but if you're going to have hobbies, it can't be all about hobbies. There has to be some value add in the mix as well.
Yeah, if you can combine hobbies with adding value, great.
Right.
This may look like part-time work. It may look like just volunteer work. It may look like just helping and noticing somebody that needs an encouraging word. That is all part of adding value. We talk about in Repurposed University, the actual process. At the very center of what helps make people repurposed is finding out your who, right? Who can I serve each and every day? Be mindful and notice people around you and say, I'm going to add value to that person's life.
That's a really good point. I just had coffee with a gentleman who is 69 years old, and he works part-time. And I said, how many hours do you work a week? And he said, probably around 30 or so, but I kind of want to back off that, not because I can't keep up physically to this job, but more or less, there's other things, there's other facets of my life where I can help people, and I want to carve out some time for that. And I gave him huge kudos for that, because that he understands that. He understood the importance of having these bigger rocks in throughout the day. It doesn't mean that we go all value add. It doesn't mean that we do all hobbies. There's a really good mixture throughout the day, and I think that's what creates some dynamic to each day.
Yeah, and finally, Jared, you have to end each day with some rest, or engineer rest into your day. It doesn't have to be at the end. Remember, God's design for life involved, the way he created this universe, was 6 days on, a day off, right? There was a day of rest. Even God rested. So one of the great things about being a retiree is you can engineer rest into your day. Maybe that's a mid-morning nap. Maybe that's a time of the day where you are sitting, you're relaxing. Because again, God designed us to work, to add value, but also to rest.
Well, I sure hope you enjoyed this conversation on the habit of setting a daily schedule. Well, recently I saw a video talking about what they called the $10 million question. Basically, it said, would you accept $10 million, no strings attached? And of course, many of us, generally speaking, would take that. But what if someone offered you $10 million, but they said, you know what, you would die tomorrow? And of course, no one would take that deal. And the video explained that means by default, you would value every single day at more than $10 million. So what's my point? If that indeed is the case, then we need to live like that. We need to make the most of every single day on earth. and creating the habit of setting a daily schedule can help you do that. Thank you for joining us today. If you'd like a copy of Ben's book, Repurpose: The Untold Story of Retirement in America, just go to our website, retirerepurposed.com. Until next time, I'm Jared Sebesta. Remember, don't retire, become repurposed. We'll see you then.
Securities offered through Avantax Investment Services. Member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Avantax Advisory Services. Insurance services offered through an Avantax affiliated insurance agency.